On June 7, 1797, the Senate of the United States took a vote. They were looking at a document signed by President John Adams. It was a peace treaty, a desperate attempt to stop American sailors from being enslaved in North Africa. But hidden inside the legalese of that treaty was a sentence that would become the single most controversial statement in the history of the founding era. It was Article 11. It read, quote, "As the government of the United States of America is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion," end quote. There was no debate. There was no outrage. There were no protests in the streets of Philadelphia. The Senate ratified the treaty unanimously. It was signed by the president. It was printed in the newspapers. And for the first decade of our history, it was the supreme law of the land. Today, Christian nationalists try to bury this document. They call it a mistake. They call it a lie. They claim the founders didn't mean it. But they did mean it. And to understand why, you have to look at the men who were rotting in chains while the Senate was taking that vote. Welcome to a special bonus episode of False Foundation. I'm Jim. We are here to dismantle the Christian nationalist myths of the American founding and look at the cold, hard mechanics of how our republic was built. No idols, no pedestals, just the facts. Let's move out. To understand why the United States officially declared itself secular in 1797, we have to go back 12 years, to the summer of 1785. In June of that year, Captain Isaac Stevens set sail from Boston Harbor. He was commanding the Maria, a small schooner designed for short coastal hops, not deep water crossings. But her owner, William Foster, was desperate. The post-war economy was in ruins, and the only way to make money was to take risks. So he loaded the Maria with lumber, salted cod, and grain, and sent Stephen and his crew of 6 across the Atlantic to Spain. It was a gamble, and they lost. On July 25th, off the coast of Portugal, they spotted a ship flying the British flag. Stevens held his course, thinking he was safe. He wasn't. As the ship pulled alongside, the British colors dropped, and the flag of Algiers went up. The Maria was staring down the barrels of 14 cannons. Stevens didn't have a single gun. He surrendered immediately. The pirates boarded looking for one thing, a Mediterranean pass. This was a specific piece of scalloped parchment that proved a nation had paid its protection money, but America wasn't paying protection money anymore. We had declared independence, and in doing so, we had lost our insurance policy. The Maria had no pass. Under the hot summer sun, the corsairs stripped Stevens and his crew of everything. Their cargo, their valuables, their clothes, even the buttons on their shirts. They arrived in Africa wearing only rags. 5 days later, it happened again. This time it wasn't a small coastal schooner. It was the Dauphin, a fully rigged ship out of Philadelphia owned by the Irwin brothers. She was carrying tobacco, high-value cargo, and she was commanded by Richard O'Brien. O'Brien wasn't a merchant by trade, he was a fighter. During the Revolution, he had served as a lieutenant on a privateer brig called the Jefferson. He knew how to handle a ship in a fight, but when he was intercepted 150 miles west of Lisbon, experience didn't matter. He ran straight into the Algerian flagship, a heavy cruiser with 34 guns and a crew of hundreds. O'Brien tried to run, but in the light winds, the massive Algerian ship, rowed by hundreds of Christian slaves below deck, ran him down. When the corsairs boarded, they didn't just climb over the rail. The reports say they leapt onto the deck with daggers clamped in their teeth. They stripped O'Brien and his 15 men naked on their own deck. They tore through the lining of their coats looking for gold. And just like the crew of the Maria, they were hauled south. When they arrived in Algiers, the 21 Americans were paraded through the streets. The crowds jeered at them. They were inspected like livestock. The Dey of Algiers, the warlord of the city, picked the strongest men to work on his own ships. The rest were sent to the Bagnios. The Bagnios are the most crucial aspect of the Treaty of Tripoli. This is the Iran hostage crisis of the 18th century. These were state-run slave prisons. They were dark, damp, and swarming with vermin. The men were shackled in iron chains and marched out every morning to the rock quarries. Under the blistering North African sun, they hauled massive stones to repair the harbor walls, the very walls that protected the pirate fleet. Their diet was 2 small loaves of black bread a day. In 1787, the bubonic plague swept through the prison. 6 of the Americans died in the filth. The survivors wrote letter after letter to Congress, to Jefferson, to anyone who would listen. They asked a simple question: where is our country? Captain O'Brien wrote, quote, "We are a victim of the little feuds of the United States." End quote. He was right. They weren't rotting in prison because America didn't care. They were rotting there because America was broke, paralyzed, and completely unprepared for the world stage. We had no navy to fight for them, we had no money to buy them back, and we had no treaty to protect them. The United States was learning a hard lesson. Independence is expensive. While Richard O'Brien was hauling rocks in the desert, the two most powerful minds in American history were sitting in a room in London, trying to figure out how to save him. It was 1786. Thomas Jefferson was the minister to France. John Adams was the minister to Britain. And they had a problem. They managed to arrange a meeting with the ambassador of Tripoli, a man named Sidi Haji Abdrahman. They wanted to ask him a simple question. Why? The United States had never attacked Tripoli. We had no quarrel with the Sultan. We weren't part of the European colonial empires. So why were they hijacking our ships and enslaving our people? The ambassador's answer was terrifyingly simple. He didn't talk about trade routes or territorial waters. He talked about theology. He told Jefferson and Adams that it was written in their Quran that all nations which had not acknowledged the prophet were sinners, and therefore it was the right and duty of the faithful to plunder and enslave them. This was a wake-up call. The founders realized that to the Barbary states, the United States wasn't a new special republic. We were just another flavor of the Christian infidel. We were being lumped in with the Spanish, the French, and the British, nations that had been fighting religious wars with Islam for 1,000 years. So Adam and Jefferson had to make a choice. How do you deal with a holy war when you don't even have a navy? This started a debate that would paralyze the government for a decade. John Adams, ever the pragmatist, did the math. He looked at the cost of building a navy versus the cost of paying the bribe. He argued that we should just pay. He said, quote, "We ought not to fight them at all unless we determine to fight them forever." End quote. To Adams, paying the tribute was just the cost of doing business in a bad neighborhood. Jefferson disagreed. He hated the idea of paying for peace. He famously said, quote, "Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute." Unquote. He wanted to build a navy. He wanted to organize a coalition of nations to blockade North Africa and burn the pirate fleets. It was a great debate, realist versus idealist, the checkbook versus the frigate. But there was one small problem. We couldn't do either. We didn't have the money to pay the bribe, Congress was broke, and we didn't have the ships to fight the war. We had sold them all. So the United States did the only thing it could do. Nothing. For 10 years, Congress debated. They formed committees. They wrote reports. And for 10 years, Richard O'Brien and his men watched their friends die of the plague in Algiers. It wasn't until 1794, when the pirates started hitting us in the Atlantic again, capturing 11 more ships and over 100 more sailors, that the government finally panicked enough to act. They decided to do both. They authorized the construction of 6 frigates, including the USS Constitution, to fight a future war, but they also authorized a massive loan to buy a peace treaty right now. And to get that peace, they needed a diplomat who could convince the Muslim warlords that America was different, that we weren't crusaders, that we weren't there to fight a holy war. They needed a man who could separate the cross from the flag. They sent Joel Barlow. Joel Barlow was an interesting choice for this mission. During the Revolutionary War, he had served as a chaplain in the Continental Army. He had preached the gospel to soldiers. But in the years since the war, Barlow had changed. He had spent time in Paris during the French Revolution. He became close friends with Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. Barlow is not the only one whose convictions evolved during the Enlightenment. By 1795, Barlow wasn't looking to build a city on a hill. He was a rationalist. He believed that religious entanglements were a trap that dragged nations into unnecessary wars. And when he arrived in Algiers to negotiate the release of the hostages, he saw the cost of those wars firsthand. He saw Richard O'Brien and the survivors of the Dauphin gaunt, sick, and desperate. Barlow realized that to get these men out and to keep future American ships safe, he had to build a diplomatic firewall. He had to convince the Muslim authorities that the United States was a new kind of political animal. He negotiated the treaty through the Dey of Algiers, who was acting as the boss for Tripoli. And when Barlow sat down to draft the English text of the treaty, he didn't use the standard diplomatic boilerplate. He wrote Article 11. Let's look at the text again. Really look at it. Quote, "As the government of the United States is not, in any sense, founded on the Christian religion," end quote. Notice the phrasing. He didn't just say the U.S. has no established church. He said the government is not founded on Christianity in any sense. That covers everything. It covers the laws, it covers the culture, it covers the intent. He continued, quote, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of the Mussulman, that's Muslims, and as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mahometan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. End quote. Barlow was drawing a hard line. He was saying, the Crusaders are over there in Europe. We're over here. We're a secular commercial republic. We don't fight holy wars because we don't have a holy faith. The treaty was signed in Tripoli in November of 1796. Barlow sent it to Philadelphia. And this is the part that matters most. When that document arrived in the Senate, it wasn't hidden in a drawer. It was read out loud. Copies were printed for the senators to review. If the United States was a Christian nation, if the founders believed that our liberty came from the cross, this was the moment to scream, heresy. But nobody did. On June 7th, 1797, the Senate ratified it unanimously. President John Adams signed it 3 days later. The hostages came home. The Christian nation myth was dead on arrival. Now, if you bring this treaty up in a debate today, you aren't going to get a unanimous vote. You are going to get a fight. The Christian nationalists know about this treaty. They hate it. And they have developed two specific arguments to try and bury it. You need to be ready to dismantle them. Argument number one is political expediency. They will tell you, Jim, the founders didn't mean it. They just wrote that to appease the Muslims. It was a lie of convenience to get the hostages out. Let's play that logic out. If the United States was truly founded as a Christian nation, dedicated to the glory of God, then denying that faith in a legal contract isn't expediency, it's apostasy. Imagine if the Apostle Peter signed a document saying, I am not in any sense a follower of Jesus, just to get a discount on shipping. We wouldn't call him a diplomat. We'd call him a traitor. Are the Christian nationalists really arguing that John Adams, a man they claim was a devout fundamentalist, was willing to sell out his savior for a trade deal? Furthermore, we have a control group. The British and French were signing treaties with Tripoli at the exact same time. They were Christian nations. Did they renounce their faith? No, the British treaties often started with, in the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity. The British managed to get a deal without denying God. The Muslims didn't demand that we deny Christianity. We volunteered it. We put that language in there because Joel Barlow and the Senate believed it was the distinguishing feature of the American Republic. Argument number two is the translation trap. This is the one the, well, actually crowd loves. They will tell you, actually, the Arabic version of the treaty didn't include Article 11. The translator changed it. And they're right. Barlow didn't speak Arabic. He relied on a court translator, a fixer working for the Dey of Algiers. This fixer likely looked at Barlow's English draft, saw the not a Christian nation part, and thought, I am not going to tell the Bashaw of Tripoli that these guys are proud atheists. He might get mad. Even then, Muslims considered Christians of the book. He understood that denouncing religion in general would probably make things worse for the Americans, something Barlow was not likely to understand. So the translator swapped it out. In the Arabic text, Article 11 is just a flowery letter of friendship. The apologist will look at you and say, see, the Muslims never agreed to it. The treaty is void. Do not fall for this, because this discrepancy actually proves our point. Think about it. The Muslims didn't ask for that clause. The Muslims didn't even see that clause. The translator removed it. That means the idea that America was not in any sense Christian came entirely from us. It was Joel Barlow's idea. It was the American Senate's approved language. We weren't saying it to appease a foreign power, since the foreign power never even read it. We were saying it because we believed it was true. The fact that the translator hid it does not change the American intent. It clarifies it. When John Adams signed that parchment, he was reading the English text. When the Senate voted, they were voting on the English text. And for the first decade of our history, the official legal stance of the United States government was that Christianity had nothing to do with our foundation. And nobody, not the press, not the pulpit, not the people, had a problem with that. Think about the timeline. The Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. 5 years later, the same generation wrote this treaty. Article 11 isn't a contradiction of the First Amendment, it is the clarification of it. When the founders told the world the United States had no religion, they weren't lying to a sultan, they were telling the truth about themselves. The Treaty of Tripoli is the receipt, and it is time we stopped letting people pretend it doesn't exist. This has been False Foundation. If you learned something, tell a friend. If you got mad, tell me. You can send your feedback, your arguments, or your own examples of historical stolen valor to Jim@falsefoundation.com. I read everything, even the hate mail.